This video was popping up in my feed for months until I finally gave into the YouTube algorithmic gods and clicked on it. Without giving too much away, the word I'd use to describe this video is frustrating. But what's annoying for me might be educational for the rest of you. So let's watch it together to shed some light on how transportation engineering in North America works, and when it doesn't work, to see if we can come up with something better.
This is the intersection of Interstate 95 and SR4 in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Truckers have called it the most congested bottleneck in America for 5 years in a row. All these roads merge together, narrowing some 16 lanes into around 7, and ending up here, the George Washington Bridge, connecting New Jersey to New York. Delays here have cost an estimated $38 million due to lost time annually.
Cost of congestion calculations are done to build the case that something needs to be done about traffic congestion, which is fine if you want to make a case for a project. But it's very important to understand that this is not the same thing as an unbiased scientific study. An empirical study will do its best to objectively look at a problem and let the results speak for themselves to learn about the nature of whatever is being studied. Like, what are the effects of increasing truck traffic on traffic flow on the bridge? Or what are the psychological effects of someone who gets stuck in traffic? Or what are the peak volumes of traffic across the George Washington Bridge? But this calculation starts with an implicit bias, which is that congestion is bad. Whether you agree or not is beside the point. This is a study that started with an assumption and trying to prove that something must be done about it, instead of letting the unbiased results speak for themselves. So in this case, an estimate is made for how much accumulated time is spent stuck in congestion, and that amount of time is multiplied by an economic estimation of what an average person's time is worth.
Okay.
Now, I am not an economist, but I think that I can point out that this conclusion might be based on some very questionable assumptions. If workers get stuck in traffic, they get paid less, right? Well, no. Maybe the worker already factored in the time of traffic into the commute, or maybe they're salaried, so they get paid the same regardless of traffic. What if a bunch of these commuters have no interest in spending any of their time in the immediate area and are simply passing through to somewhere far away, so the cost is irrelevant to the metro area that they're driving through? If a person is leaving work and they are delayed 20 minutes and have a little less time to watch their 33rd rerun of Suits, is that even a loss to begin with? To be clear, congestion does have costs. More stop-and-go traffic means more wear and tear on vehicles, which means higher maintenance cost. Longer transit times for goods might mean that logistics companies charge more, which can increase the cost of the product. And there are great scientific studies that try to understand these costs and how it works. But when you make an assumption that's this sweeping and assign an arbitrary value to everyone's time, you've left what is scientific and entered the fantastical. So back to the rest of the video.
So, we asked a transportation engineer with about 25 years of experience for potential ways to fix this traffic. Because this area has been built up over time, physical improvements like adding lanes or shoulders might seem simple, but they're actually complex.
It's cost prohibitive to widen the bridge to just add this much space.
And more space could lead to more demand. So instead, Singh suggests focusing on creating more reliable traffic flow.
With a major corridor, you may expect to see interchanges such as the Cloverleaf interchange, where we want to separate two major crossings and we want to raise one over the other. That's called grade separation. In this case, we would separate two major roadways and connect them with a series of ramps that would then allow you to get from one road to another. We typically use this in rural or suburban areas. So if we were to apply a Cloverleaf interchange at this location, we would actually need to have a bigger footprint in order to make that work. As you can see, something of that size is really too large for this environment. And it would require wiping out a lot of the neighborhood, a lot of the park space that's available for residents. And so for those reasons, we typically don't use those type of interchanges in an urban environment.
Yes, the cloverleaf is a common type of freeway interchange. FYI, in case you didn't know, interchange is usually the word we use to describe how two freeways connect to each other, because unlike a traditional intersection, they are grade separated and do not require traffic to stop. Now, a feature of cloverleafs is that they consume a lot of land, and Singh does mention how this makes them ill-suited for an urban environment. An almost perfect example of a cloverleaf is the interchange of 580 and 680 in Dublin, California. And zooming out, oh, would you look at that? They built it in the middle of Dublin. Cloverleafs are quite common in the North American urban environment. But what's weird about this segment of the video is this sudden pivot to discussing infrastructure that has nothing to do with solving the basic problem. We already know that the basic bottleneck is the bridge itself. How would a cloverleaf change that? And speaking of interchanges, they already exist in the area. It's just that this is a variety of interchange that requires less land than a traditional cloverleaf. And the loops of a traditional cloverleaf are just stacked on top of each other here to save space on the eastern side of the bridge. So it seems so far, nonsensical solutions are offered up, so they can be quickly rejected to give the viewer the impression that the content producers are thinking deeply and seriously about this problem.
What is my purpose?
You pass butter.
Oh my god.
And we're already a quarter of the way through the video. Please, Wall Street Journal, please show me that you can do better.
A roundabout is another treatment that we use when we have the intersection of two or more major roadways.
Roundabouts are beneficial in keeping the flow of traffic going while slowing drivers down.
That's not a roundabout. That's a traffic rotary.
Reducing crashes.
So you'd think that perhaps a roundabout like this could help on our corridor.
But the bridge has two levels.
Getting all the roads to that same level in order to make those connections would be very challenging.
Singh says this separation is meant to maximize the number of vehicles to push through the bottleneck.
As you can see, we have large vehicles such as trucks on the upper level and passenger cars as well. On the lower level, we just have passenger cars, where the trucks are slower moving, cars are a bit more nimble and faster moving. So by having the trucks and the buses operating independently is what we call traffic separation. It allows distribution of cars from the lower level to the upper level during very busy times in order to help balance that demand. So what we should be moving towards is recognizing we have a very robust roadway network in place. The question now is how can we take advantage of that operationally to improve the flow of traffic?
Singh says creative solutions can help divert traffic away from the area's bottleneck altogether.
Is there an infrastructure move that we can do to move trucks off of the GW bridge? Today, the majority of trucks that deliver into Brooklyn, Queens, and Long Island come through the Verrazano Narrows Bridge or through our corridor. So there's really limited opportunities for them to cross into this area. And because there's no rail, all those goods have to be moved via truck. So 90% of the goods coming into New York City is transported via truck.
Almost 200 million tons of freight are handled within New York City's 5 boroughs annually, servicing over 8.4 million residents and 4.5 million jobs.
Another opportunity for major construction is a cross-harbor tunnel that would connect a major rail corridor in New Jersey with an established and existing corridor in Brooklyn. And that could allow the shipment of goods via rail to take some of those trips off of the road network.
Currently, Port Authority is evaluating an option to add a freight tunnel running from Jersey City to Brooklyn as part of the Cross Harbor Freight Program.
Okay, finally, we arrived at an interesting bit. Trucks are big vehicles, and they do a lot to degrade the flow capacity of free flow traffic. According to the textbook Geography of Transportation Systems, in 2016, around 8% of all traffic on the George Washington Bridge were trucks. So would rerouting most of these to a new route have an impact? Yeah, probably. But there's two things to consider. One, why would you? It's not that unusual for truck traffic as a percentage of overall traffic to be in the highest single digits on important logistical routes. And one of the basic reasons for the construction of the interstate highway system was to improve truck logistics. Because trains are great, But at some point in the delivery chain, these goods need to be distributed from a train depot to their final location via something like a truck. Even in the Netherlands, when Albert Heijn stores get restocked with groceries, it gets done by truck. So I am a bit skeptical of this argument that fixing congestion on the interstate route across the bridge would require the interstate to stop doing what it was originally built to do. And the second consideration is, what do you then replace it with? So if we are replacing it with a freight tunnel, it's probably a good idea to do that. But even if they do, how will these goods be moved from the freight depot to their final destination? That's right, via truck. And unless all of these logistical vehicles will be restricted to Manhattan at all times, unlikely, that still means some substantial truck traffic across the George Washington Bridge. So while this idea could certainly remove some truck trips across the bridge, I'm not convinced that this will significantly improve congestion, since the bridge is already at capacity, and any small savings from this measure would probably be filled in immediately from pent-up traffic demand.
One major strategy that we want to look at is getting people out of cars and into transit.
Strategies include congestion pricing, a policy that is already in the works. It would charge drivers more for access into high traffic areas during peak hours. And that money would go toward building out more public transportation.
Currently, the rail network brings people in via Long Island Railroad, Metro North, or New Jersey Transit into Penn Station or Grand Central Station. But the proposal that's been put out is creating a more integrated regional rail network. And so, for example, we could connect some of the lines that end in Hoboken into Lower Manhattan and up into Grand Central Station, but then also going through and connecting to Columbus Circle to capture more of Upper West Side and Northern Midtown, and then go back into New Jersey. An integrated rail network would help get more people out of cars, which would then reduce a lot of the congestion on our corridor.
In 2022, New York Governor Kathy Hochul announced the groundbreaking of the Metro North Penn Station Access Project, which plans to add 4 new stations in the Bronx and expanded rail service to Connecticut and Westchester by 2027.
All of these concepts are good, but they are so generalized that it's hard to know where to go from here. This is an educational video, so it would have been nice to hear more detail. Yes, improving transit makes sense. Yes, congestion pricing is a great idea, and it's honestly insane that New York waited until 2025 to finally roll it out. In just 1 week after its introduction, data shows that crossing times on the George Washington Bridge dropped 40%. That's an amazing start. But what I'm still waiting to hear about is the design changes that this transportation engineer would propose. Because don't get me wrong, there are design solutions that would help, but we haven't heard any.
According to the American Transportation Research Institute, congestion cost the trucking industry about $74.5 billion in 2018, and nearly 1.2 billion hours of delays due to traffic congestion on national highway systems, which directly impacts the cost of consumer goods. Singh says a variety of measures are needed to reduce all this red and make the roads more safe.
The safer road network is going to eliminate a lot of the fatalities that we see on a day-to-day basis. It's also going to reduce the frequency of major crashes on the roadway, blocking traffic.
Autonomous driving technology for both personal and public transportation vehicles could help reduce crashes, he says. Think adaptive cruise control and lane centering.
A lot of the technology that goes into autonomous vehicles are being implemented in cars right now, being implemented in buses, and so we can benefit from a lot of that safety and technology today.
It's a long road ahead for widespread use of autonomous vehicles, and urban areas like this will always have high demand. So, Singh says transportation professionals can only seek ways to help minimize congestion with multiple travel options for both trucks and consumers.
So let's review what we've seen. The Wall Street Journal does a reasonably good job of describing the problem. The I-95 route sees a lot of traffic congestion on and around the George Washington Bridge. 2 confusing design proposals are mentioned, which are immediately discounted and seem to hint that any design solution is a dead end. Then, the video shifts to traffic operations, where we learn some specifics about truck traffic and how we could go about removing some of those logistical trips with trains, which ignores one of the main purposes of the interstate system and would only remove a portion of large vehicles, since trucks are still needed for the final leg of delivery. Then we have a stronger ending with a generic proposal to boost transit and the very promising idea of congestion pricing, which has shown strong performance after this video was originally released. Then there is a final bit about autonomous vehicles. To be fair, they only mentioned it as an afterthought and spent very little time on it. But as a transportation engineer, I always get annoyed with this topic. I like to tell people that no amount of smart tech in your vehicle can make up for the stupid infrastructure that it's driving on. As an example, even if every car in North America was replaced with autonomous vehicles that worked perfectly, you still would not fix traffic in North American urban environments. Because it's not the following distance or the brief reaction time to accelerate from queues that are the bottleneck. It's the intersection itself. And I personally hate it when civil engineers abdicate responsibility for a crappy design by promising that the tech bro will come in one day and fix everything. Because it's not like all of this traffic was caused by a bad design to begin with, right? Right? To me, this video feels mislabeled. It's more like civil engineer describes America's worst bottleneck. I would have loved to have seen some innovative design ideas that would have helped. But as they say, if you want something done right,
I'll do it myself.
So let's see if we can come up with something that the Wall Street Journal couldn't. If you want to learn how to see things from the perspective of a transportation engineer, we must zoom out. Now that we're all the way up here, let's talk about traffic. The best thing to do is to not think of traffic simply as traffic. There are different kinds. For instance, there is through traffic, the kind of traffic that wants to cross this bridge and go on to, say, Long Island or somewhere else far away. Then there is access traffic, the kind of traffic that crosses the bridge and exits quickly to reach destination in Manhattan. Due to the length of this video, I am forced to generalize a bit, so think of through traffic and access traffic like oil and water. They do not mix well, and everyone is better off keeping both separated as much as possible. Freeways are the type of transportation infrastructure that is good for through traffic. So they're the ideal road for long distance travel between cities, like Los Angeles to San Diego or Dortmund to Amsterdam. It's this example and remembering what freeways are useful for, which can help unravel the first part of this giant knot of a problem. Maybe it's not a problem of there being enough freeway infrastructure. Maybe the problem is that there's too much. Look at the giant interchange of 95, 46, and 9. Now look more closely at 46. It parallels Interstate 80 and then slices through Palisades Park and Leona. Why doesn't the highway just terminate at the interchange with 95? After all, since this bridge is the bottleneck and all traffic traveling west from this point and this point are both destined to drive across the George Washington Bridge, how helpful are these 2 extra lanes connecting in from 46 when 16 travel lanes are already crunching down to 7? There are 2 arguments that can be made for it. One is that 46 is a shortcut that reduces the trip to the bridge by 2.2 kilometers. And the second is that 46 is important because it offers easy freeway access to the George Washington Bridge for all the people living here. But these aren't good arguments. This shortcut only saves around 79 seconds of travel time. Is 79 seconds worth all the tens of millions of dollars spent building this thing, especially when the real bottleneck in the system is the GW bridge? And the second argument, the one about access, really gets to the heart of why this might be the worst bottleneck in the US, and why driving in most North American cities tends to suck. And the heart of the issue is that traffic planners have tried to make the George Washington Bridge do 2 very simple, but 2 very different things. Trying to preserve the bridge's effectiveness as a through route for long distance traffic, but also trying to make it useful for local access traffic. So a hypothetical driver from Newark on his way to Long Island must compete with a commuter doing a quick dash from Fort Lee to Harlem. By being the overwhelmingly better option to travel east or west for both types of traffic, the George Washington Bridge induces such a high level of traffic that no amount of increase in capacity is ever going to come out ahead. So, making the bridge more useful for through traffic and less useful to local access traffic would be the core of my strategy to fix it. So my first step would be to shut off the on-ramp that connects 46 to 95. And this could be done immediately with cone barricades, just like what they do for temporary road closures during road reconstruction. This would help in several ways. 1. This section of 46 could no longer be used as a shortcut to the bridge, which would reduce the amount of traffic flowing through the neighborhood. That's always a plus for reducing pollution and traffic noise through a residential area. This reduction in through traffic would also make it easier for local access traffic to use the road to come to and depart from areas like Palisades Park. So a driver could still merge from 95 onto 46 and then use the 46 to access a destination in this neighborhood, or they could drive west across the bridge and still use 46 as a through route. This would help long distance through traffic in two ways. 1. We can reduce some of those merging movements that slow down traffic by reducing the 16 incoming lanes to 14 incoming lanes. And 2, we can reduce some of the traffic demand on the bridge, since we have made it less useful for local access traffic by removing a direct connection. But that's just the first closure. We can do much more if we are really interested in leveraging this concept. The final western approach to the bridge is dotted with on-ramps that are highly inviting to local access traffic. I count an additional 3 localized on-ramps, with 4 lanes in total that could be closed, which would go a long way in reducing the traffic pressure on the bridge from the immediate local area. And that's just the western side. The eastern side is even more convoluted, but since I'm not from this area and Google Maps can only get you so far, I'll save myself the embarrassment of trying to make a detailed solution and leave it up to the locals to apply the same principle to that side, which is to make 95 as unuseful as possible to the immediate urbanized areas surrounding it on both sides of the bridge. Now, if you're still watching, thank you. You might be thinking that some of these proposals would probably royally piss off all the people living in the immediate vicinity of the bridge, since restricting their access would force them onto long detours for the benefits of drivers going long distances. But that worry also highlights the following problem. As of right now, there's no convenient alternative for local access traffic between this area and Manhattan. Drivers are forced to use the George Washington Bridge unless they take a long detour to another bridge. Even the only form of public transit, buses, need to use this bridge to get to their destination. But it doesn't have to be that way. Closing these on-ramps is how we can make a better road for long distance through traffic. But we also need to make sure that there's a quality parallel system for access traffic. What can we offer people who just need to do a 5-kilometer hop across the Hudson? This is the Edgewater Ferry Crossing. It's the closest one I could find to the George Washington Bridge, at 3 kilometers away. I checked their website, and a one-way trip across the Hudson costs $12.25. An unlimited monthly pass costs $380, which lets you take the ferry as often as you wish, every 40 minutes. And it only runs during the week from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. And this is the ferry crossing at Amsterdam Central Station. It's one of the only alternatives to the 4-lane IJ Tunnel Road, which connects Amsterdam North to the rest of Amsterdam. It operates 24/7, and during peak hour, ferries depart every 4 minutes, even on a Sunday. This line is only meant for pedestrians, cyclists, and mopeds, and using this ferry is free. And this is just one of 4 ferry crossings that offer similar levels of service and are only a few kilometers away from each other. Further away from Amsterdam, there are 3 more ferries that operate 24/7, which offer services to cars and trucks as well. Last I checked, a one-way ticket for a car is just €1.50, and €3.70 for trucks. Now, I know a lot of you NJB fans already know where I'm going with this comparison, but just let me finish. Remember, the population of Amsterdam itself only has a population of 934,000 people. Manhattan alone has a population of 1.6 million. There's no reason a similar service to local access traffic couldn't be offered across the Hudson. Imagine a ferry service like this, connecting New York and New Jersey with options for pedestrians, cyclists, cars, and trucks. Now, this option wouldn't be faster than taking the bridge itself, so we wouldn't need to worry about long through traffic exiting the highway and flooding through the neighborhood to take this option. But it would be convenient and quick enough that using it would probably be better than taking a long detour to use the George Washington Bridge. These incentives is how we could disentangle long through traffic from local access traffic in this area. And I don't mean to discount other obvious ideas like extending public transit via a tunnel between these two areas. They absolutely should, and it's rather ridiculous that they haven't done it already. But that's going to take years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. This could be done relatively quickly and cheaply, and it could continue as a nice complement to a future extended transit system, just like how it does currently in Amsterdam. I saved this part for the end since it seemed better to arrive at this conclusion organically instead of declaring it at the beginning. After listening to my pitch, some of you may wonder, if so much of this problem can be solved by restricting local access to the freeway in urban areas, then why do they bother building such a freeway through the urban environment to begin with? And that, my dear viewer, is a great question, and gets to the heart of the issue with urban freeways. When a section of the urban fabric is demolished to build a freeway, we have created a new travel direction in the city that is far faster to anything else in the vicinity. So the demand to use it will be very high, as drivers from a large swath of the urban area are drawn to it and use it to arrive more quickly at their destination. And the demand to accommodate all of this local demand with access ramps does seem fair enough. The road authority did just demolish a significant chunk of their city for a freeway. What would be the point of building one through the city if people couldn't use it to get around, leave, or enter the city? And yet, the sheer volume of urban traffic demand drawn to the freeway is so high that the congestion begins to make average travel times similar to parallel local roads, which also defeats the purpose of the urban freeway. This description is a more nuanced take on induced demand. Induced demand, while very important, is sometimes misunderstood and oversimplified by urbanists with the best of intentions. I've heard the argument along the lines of any improvement in freeways is pointless because it will simply induce more demand. Well, if that were true, what would be the point of building any flow road anywhere? This flow road in Harlem is quite convenient for drivers, and it doesn't suffer from a crippling amount of congestion. The truth is just a bit more relative and less spectacular. The amount of traffic demand that we're going to induce is going to depend on just how much faster this route is relative to the next alternative. The infamous case of the Katy Freeway in Houston is a great example. Interstate 10 is clearly going to offer the fastest path of travel in the east to west direction for all trips, except maybe for a person who just needs to drive 1 mile down the street. So long distance through traffic and all the local traffic from the surrounding area will be drawn to it until 1, the freeway is at capacity, or 2, all traffic demand in the region is met, which has never happened once in the entire history of urban freeways. This is why a more distributed network of urban flow roads are a better option and why the Dutch use them instead. A 2-lane flow road like this, with minimum stop and go, does offer the fastest direction of travel for the immediate geographic area. But it is not so much faster that it would draw traffic from an enormous geographic area. Instead, there may be another flow road just a kilometer away that offers the best mobility to its immediate geographic area, and so on. These smaller traffic accumulations are manageable, and the narrow widths of these urban flow roads are much more compatible with city life and city budgets. Think of a city a little bit like a human organ. Instead of having one giant artery that cuts through the middle of it and tries to handle everything, a much more intricate web of smaller blood vessels provide coverage instead. And it's not until near the end of the organ that these smaller vessels connect into a larger artery, which will then provide an efficient path to the next organ. And so there you have it, an honest attempt from a transportation engineer trying to solve one of the worst bottlenecks in the US. It's definitely not perfect. I tried to keep the scope and budget realistic and within a time frame that would be relatively quick to implement. And I didn't even mention self-driving cars once. So credit where credit is due. If you've made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for being such an awesome listener. I want to use the end of the video to tell you about the new Build the Lanes Discord server. This server is a place where professionals and advocates can come to take their interest in transportation to the next level. Once you sign up for a premium membership, you can interact with dozens of members who advocate for and work on transportation projects all over the world. It's a great way to get new knowledge in real time. We also have a weekly call where you can talk directly to me and ask me about the channel, my work, or anything you want really. And if you're really ambitious, you can sign up for the highest membership and book an hour-long one-on-one appointment with me every month. So if you're an advocate and you want your own transportation consultant for cheap, consider signing up. I'll leave a Discord invite link in the video description. Thank you. Until the next one. Bye-bye.